Bob, welcome back to the podcast.
Casey, excited to be here. Really appreciate the effort. What episode is this going to be? So I'm like 186 and 350 or something?
It's a really good question. I think you're around 365, if memory serves me correctly.
We'll just go every 186 episodes. We'll come back around to the next one. So
that's what I'm thinking. I just can't believe how quickly time has passed. I feel like, we've stayed in touch, but I just don't feel like it's been that long since we've had a conversation. And then we look back and I go, boy, it's been almost 2 years since we had this conversation. And this is a totally new one. So much happens in the last couple of years. In 2020, we were focusing largely, we were talking about your no regrets retirement plan, but a lot of our conversation had to do with COVID at the time and the impact that was making in retirement.
Yeah, so much has changed. And I think that, the COVID actually was great for retirement because it gave people some practice, right? Like you're going to be at home all day with your spouse. How's that feel? Like I'm working till I'm 70 now, folks. Now.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things you cover in a lot of the new material that you have is just practicing retirement. And part of that is, figuring out what to do with your time. If you've never had the time to figure out what to do with your time, then what are you going to do with your time? And so I really enjoyed that part of the quiz, and I want to get into that here in just a bit, but let's just jump right into it. What is retirement intelligence? We've got EQs, we've got IQs, we got a whole new Q here. So what is retirement intelligence? What is the RQ?
There wasn't a tool out there to assess personal retirement readiness. And so, a lot of times you'll see, are you ready to retire? It's all about your finances. And what I've studied for the last 13 years is why people fail in retirement. And what we wanted to really take a look at then is kind of laying over that knowledge of, why do people fail and why do people succeed? What makes for a better transition? And kind of put that into an online tool that people could kind of click through. And really, it raises people's awareness about the amount of change and actually the sophistication in the transition. And so we wanted to really focus on individuals and how they're going to transition rather than the financial side of things.
So as part of the quiz, you share an equation that is IQ, EQ plus SQ plus AQ equals your RQ. And so could you walk us through that equation and all those little acronyms there?
Yeah. So, the IQ, so obviously that's intelligence, right? So just, but people don't know a lot about the transition, right? So many people don't realize that retirement is one of the top 10 most stressful life events. They just think it's going to be fun and easy. And so we want to measure a person's intelligence about their knowledge about the transition. Of course, we know emotional intelligence is EQ. And again, there's a lot of change that comes with the retirement transition. The Holmes-Rahe scale has 43 things that, are life's biggest, stressors or factors. And 20 of those things intersect with retirement. So there's a lot of change. So you got to have really good EQ to make the transition. SQ is spiritual quotient. So really, are you living out your values and beliefs? Because the fact is, a lot of people go through life on autopilot, right? And they're just kind of, they think they're living according to their values, but they haven't had them put into kind of the context of retirement. And then AQ is the adversity quotient or resiliency quotient. And again, with the amount of change that can take place, and again, aging comes with its own hurdles, will you be able to bounce back quickly? And so by measuring and looking at those four components, we can help people apply those things to the RQ and make a better transition.
As I think about these different levels, I go, well, I'm wondering if there's actually a technical weighting that you're using in the quiz, but I think of it as almost Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Is there a hierarchy here that you see? And maybe that results in some degree of weighting. I notice there isn't a financial quotient in there. It seems like financial quotient should be an element of this, but maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe this is something completely separate.
Well, we want it to be something separate, because it just interferes with the other pieces. And it's really, the financial side can just be more complex. And so it slows the process down. The idea is if we get the person right first, we can get the money right later. I think people go about it the other way. Well, my money's right? I replaced my income, but now I'm bored, I'm isolated, and I don't know why. And I think the other big thing is there's a couple stigmas about retirement that people don't realize. You can't say that it's not going well, right? Because you have enough money not to work and all the time to do what you want. So when it feels weird or out of sorts, they don't know what to say. So people suffer in silence. And so we want to reduce or eliminate that, get the personal side right. Because again, the financial side, like there's plenty of experts out there to help with that, but there aren't a lot of people to help with the other piece.
Mm. So if I think about that, I mean, could we put this in a hierarchy? And maybe I think that's also an issue that even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I mean, Abraham Maslow actually recognized that in his construction of the hierarchy, saying, well, it's not necessarily an order of importance, right? Yes, you need those basic things. However, we all need all of these things. We need to make sure all of them are part of our lives in order to experience a full life. And is that the same thing here with the RQ? Are all of these things equivalent? I mean, it seems like it would be very easy to say, well, at the bottom of the hierarchy is our financial quotient, and then we'd have retirement. We'd have IQ, EQ, SQ, AQ. So we'd have retirement knowledge, then emotional intelligence, then spiritual quotient, then adversity quotient. It seems like we might see that actually come out, but I'm just curious how you view it.
Yeah. So, and I don't want to downplay the financials. I mean, obviously it's critically important, but there's a lot of tools and resources for it already. And it does obviously play a role. And, when we look at the weighting, so there is a weighting, inside the system. And so basically it's more like a credit score. And so where, why all of a sudden is my credit score up or down? Or I think it's weird that when you go to, if you have a high score and you go to get, a new car, that your credit score gets dinged. And you're like, well, how did that? It's hard to kind of understand. We didn't design it that way, but essentially what we really have looked at is we built the scale up to 1395. And basically when people get 1,000 or higher is where we start to see better transitions. And so some people are coming in at the 850 or the 950, and there are some weightings that matter a little bit more. One of the crucial components of the assessment is, do you have a written plan to replace your work identity, fill your time, stay relevant, connected, mentally and physically active, and express your spiritual beliefs? Now, there is a part in there that says, do you have a financial, written financial plan as well? That's what most people do circle, but they don't have the other pieces, because this is what all this really boils down to, is people spend thousands of dollars and, tens of hours getting their financial plan written down, but what about their personal life? So there are some weightings that are more important, and there are some answers that aren't scored at all, which is the stuff that you see on the second page of the report.
Well, I'm glad you say that. I scored a 1062. So, okay, I just made it over that hurdle, and I can't wait to share some of, what came out of me taking that quiz here in a moment. But another thing that kind of stood out to me, it says the profile scores you in three key areas: retirement knowledge, work life, and personal life. So retirement knowledge, work life, personal life. I'm going, okay, well, how does that intersect with the equation offered? It looks like I'm being graded on 4 things in the equation, but really it's focusing on 3 key areas. Can you help me reconcile that?
Yep. So the IQ is really the first part. So the knowledge side. So the knowledge about the transition. And then the EQ, SQ, and the AQ is in both the work life and the personal. And, for example, like, measuring adversity, we measure that both in the work life as well as the personal life by asking the question, my work life, successes or failures are easy to recall or hard to recall. And, again, a lot of people, there's some people who focus more on their failures than on their successes. And that is a challenge to their resiliency. And so that's the kind of things that we're looking for. And then we're double assessing social network and some of those things. We're asking, we do have some validating questions that cross over. And what we're really looking for is a couple things: inconsistencies and variances. And so if someone scores their social camaraderie at work very high, but then in the personal side, they say most of their friends are outside the workplace, it's just a point for discussion to make sense of it. And then we also ask a lot of personality-based questions like, are you consider yourself type A, left brain, right brain? Because again, what we see is people perceive themselves one way, but they haven't applied it to the retirement transition. And that's why they feel out of sorts. And so that's where we're kind of connecting the dots and where this just gets deeper. But the cool thing about it, it's really about a conversation, and no one's had the conversation. No one says, here's my personality and here's what's important to me. And let's talk about how that maps out into the transition.
Yeah. And it seems like it's so hard sometimes to get someone to start to even be open to this conversation. But this is the most important conversation we can have before we step into retirement. It's not the financial conversation. It really should start with the softer side before we ever get to that. So there's something that you said in Market Watch that came across to me is interesting. You said that it's not to tell us how prepared we are for retirement. You said this, it's about whether or not the type of person you are matches the type of retirement you envision for yourself. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. So I think what's really important is sometimes people are different people at work than they are at home, and they aren't sure which personality will transfer over to retirement. And then each individual is different. This is kind of the problem with retirement is there's no single definition as to the best way to retire. And so men retire different than women, extroverts than introverts, solo agers versus people with kids and grandkids. And so we can't just say, here's the 5 ways to retire successfully, or here's the 5 ways you fail, because an introvert doesn't need, an extensive social network. And someone who is left brain and, type A, they are going to need goals in the first 30 days of retirement. Otherwise, they're going to feel out of sorts. And so it's really about, taking a look at the individual and saying, them self-reporting, this is me and what's important to me and how I function, and then saying, what does that look like over here? And so we're not trying to score you or to get you to a 1395, but we're trying to recognize and have you think about, this is the stuff that's important to me. Am I prepared to make the transition with these skills and talents, or do I need to do other things?
Well, as a type A, I want the 1395. I mean, I want the perfect score, right?
Yeah.
But you say that's really not the goal, or that's not important. Well, when you think about this, the type of person that we envision ourselves being, the type of person we are, how often are you finding a mismatch there? I mean, is this really vital and something that you really created the quiz for because there is such a consistent mismatch that you're finding with your clients?
Yeah. It really, people, a lot of people just waste the first couple of years trying to figure it out, because they haven't thought about, and that's why, again, one of the things we ask is, do you have goals for the first 30 days of retirement? Most people don't. The honeymoon phase is one of the most dangerous phases because, yes, you retired and yes, you deserve to relax and hang out, but you're really creating a series of maladaptive habits and behaviors for 3 months or 6 months before you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to start working out. I'm going to reconnect with my friends at work. Like, it's too late. You've already dug yourself these holes. And so what we see is, how do we help people avoid that so that a year or 2 years in, they're not digging out? And so there just are a lot of inconsistencies. And it's also about awareness, because again, no one's told someone that you should have goals for your first 30 days. Another important thing is volunteering. So I can't tell you how many people, Bob, when I retire, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to work out. I'm like, oh, you're not going to do any of it because you're not already doing it. Like, we do what we know. And if you go into retirement with knowing who you are going to volunteer with, the fact that you like volunteering with them, you already have a connection, that's a huge bonus. Instead of getting there because people get there, they wait 6 months. Yeah, I want to volunteer. Then they never pull the trigger. And so we're just trying to help them retire with this stuff rather than waiting until they get there.
Kind of retire with purpose.
Exactly. Well, and the cliche is you should retire to something, but you're just procrastinating your best life. Retire with it. And to your point, purpose and passion are huge. And I'm sure you see it too. There's just some people who just struggle to connect. And so we want them to jump into retirement with it rather than wait and figure it out.
Well, and I can say we're talking a lot about pre-retirement and how this benefits individuals that are pre-retirement, but I can see someone listening that's already in retirement going, oh, well, I guess it's too late. I mean, how does this quiz benefit someone that's already in retirement? How can they leverage it if they can at all?
So we're working on a post-retirement version, so you'd be surprised. I mean, how much I've been working on this for 2 years, and there's still some browser bugs and different things inside the system. So we will have a post-retirement version shortly out there that is designed for people who are 2 to 3 years, because the work questions, obviously they're not working, so we're going to change out those questions so that, they can be looked at differently. But it's really about the same process. A lot of people haven't, really just found that purpose or direction and feel kind of out of sorts. And a lot of times working with the retirement coach or even a tool like this, it's normalizing behavior that it's okay. You're not the only one. We see this all the time. but then really just digging into what are some ways we can start to look at this differently, to figure out, again, their personality, what's important to them. One of the big three questions I like to ask are, whose rules are you following? Why are you following those rules? And what would happen if you broke them? For people who are stuck and in retirement, because they tend to have gotten there thinking it was going to work out or be a certain way. And we just want to expand their thought process to say, wait a minute, I can be more and do more, and let's take steps to do it.
Mm. And I don't know if you can answer this question yet. Maybe the quiz is too new. Maybe it's not reaching statistical significance at this point, but if you can answer it, that'd be great. I am wondering, and I just think, years from now, I can see this 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now being incredibly valuable retirement research, especially on the softer side of retirement, of course. And what kind of data are you uncovering at this point, if any, that's maybe statistically significant? Are there people that you're seeing that decided that they shouldn't retire at all? They thought they were going to retire. Now they've decided they're not going to retire as a result of doing the quiz. Are you finding misalignment among couples very consistently, and how are we working through that? You can just share some of the takeaways so far.
Yeah, so we are collecting the data, and that was one of the add-ons that we've done recently, so that we can look at one of the most popular answers for married couples, for men, for women, and kind of we're going to be pulling that data. As far as statistical significance, we're still only around 1,000 people, so we don't want to pull that data until we get to about 5,000. And we're expediting the process because obviously we're still launching and making sure everything's functioning well. Retirement Coaches Association, we do have a separate research project that will help answer some of those things, but we haven't pulled any of that data. But with the coaches that we work with and with the people that we've engaged so far, probably the biggest surprise is, comes in the work life, that, most people who are good at their work score high on their identity being tied to it, that the value they get out of it, the importance of it. And what's really interesting about that is that's the way it's supposed to be. If you're good at your job, then you're going to score high in the work-life scale areas. But it's actually the only area on the assessment that we want to see those numbers go down. Because a lot of people, they're really good at their job. They're really focused. They engage, and especially financial advisors are actually terrible at retirement. What we call enmeshment, because, if you think about advisors, like, we're go-to people value our opinion, we're friends with our clients, like, you're just connected and engaged, and like, you're going to give all that up. And so it's figuring out how to replace those things. But that's probably kind of been the most eye-opening area. We do see a lot of variance just in personality. And again, it's just because they self-identify one way, but they just haven't thought about how that's going to look in retirement. So those are two of the biggest areas, the changeover in the work life, and then the variances.
Funny you say that. I scored a 5 out of 5 on how much my identity is associated with my work and how important it is to me. And so when I see that, I think the easy thing to say there, or to gather out of that, you'd go, well, I deduce I should not retire then, right? I mean that's how I look at it. I go 5 out of 5 on both of these things. Like, should people like me even consider retirement?
Well, and that's the other kind of thing. And that's why retirement's not bad and you don't have to do it. I think it's striking a balance, because what I've realized about myself through all this work is I do like my work too much. I get a lot out of it, and that's not good. Over time, I have to scale that back. I maybe only go from a 5 to a 3, but it's easier to make a partial transition when your work life is a 3 than it is a 5. What happens to a lot of people is it's a 5 and they decide to quit cold turkey, and they're like, well, that wasn't a good idea. And there's still a lot of issues in corporate America. I mean, there's plenty of consulting companies that are still kicking out partners at age 62. And you're like, wait a minute, man, like 62 and they're thriving, and you're going to force them to retire. So that's where the trouble comes in too, because those people are 5s, they're partners in big firms, and all of a sudden they're forced to walk away. And that's where the problems arise.
And that's why you said we have to scale it back, or you have to scale that back. I have to scale that back over time. You're saying that because we really can't control when we retire.
And you don't know if it's going to be a health concern, if you're going to have to be a caregiver, and again, like, I love my work, it's great, but, my work can't love me back. And if we don't invest in our things that can love us back, then we get to this point where that's all that we can hold on to. And so it doesn't mean you have to change everything, but, the other thing I see, especially with families and work committed people is, they retire and say, now I'm ready to spend time with family and be more engaged. Well, you weren't doing it before, so it doesn't mean that your family is ready. And so it is just about finding balance. Because again, I consider myself semi-retired, but I work 60 hours a week. It's because I do what I love, right? And so there's this kind of balance. But what I think is so valuable about all this is just talking about it. Most people aren't. Most people don't critically think about retirement. They just assume it's going to be good. They're going to be happy when they get there, and then they're surprised. And so it's just saying, let's start to question all of this and how easy it's going to be, or how can I make it better? And that's really the fun of it for me, because I like to know what makes people tick, like what's going on up there, what are you thinking and feeling? And a lot of times it's the first time people are having a conversation about it.
Yeah, the light bulb's really going off for me, Bob, because I'm thinking about our planning process and what, the way that we design plans for people that don't want to retire. I call the book Job Optional because that's the kind of plan that we want to create. We don't want to help people necessarily get to retirement. I just want you to know that if something happens tomorrow, you decide to retire or force into retirement, you already have a plan in place. So now you can live confidently knowing that you can always retire if you want to, but you don't have to. Well, that's the financial piece. Sure. Now I've got the financial confidence to know I'm prepared if I get forced into retirement tomorrow. But we also need this other piece. Why not start dialing down? I get it. It's like, I really don't want to let go of my 5. Right. I'm like, oh, I got my 5. I like my 5 out of 5.
Right.
I love my work. It's important to me. I don't want to dial that back. But I see how that is a huge risk, just like if I wasn't financially prepared for retirement and forced into it, that I need to also start dialing back this number. So it's helping me, Bob. I appreciate it.
Well, it's funny for me because like I'm the same. Like I'm a 7 out of 5, right? So are you. Like you're, but then it is just like last year, I take an annual fishing trip with my buddies. I did not have the time or capacity to go last year. I did not. Made absolutely no sense. But I knew I had to because of this work, knowing that my social relationships, my social network in retirement is going to be the most important thing. If I keep delaying, and I've only missed one trip in the last 5 years, but if I keep delaying and putting it off, I'm not going to get asked. I'm not going to have a close relationship with them. And my social network deteriorates because I'm working too much. And so I don't think it's how do we slow Casey from a 7 to a 4 or hitting a 5 to a 4. It's where can you plug into, where can you got to start saying no to some work and yes to some other things.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like the ideal number would be around 2 or 3. You still love your work and gather a significant portion of your life's purpose and meaning. However, that's vital, right? In whatever work we're doing, but we also want this other source of identity, this other source of purpose and meaning, which is, just dialing that down a little bit. And I can see filling that out for myself and going, it's a 5. However, the reality is it isn't a 5. And this is why it's so important to have the conversation about this on the back end. It's not just about doing the assessment. It's not about, and that's where I really understand it's not about the score that you get. It's really about the conversations that it leads to.
Because really, you're going to score better on, so if you went back into the RQ after we have this discusussion, you're going to score higher because you're going to understand it. You're going to see some of the things.
I probably wouldn't put a 5 there anymore.
Well, and you're going to score higher in the IQ if you missed it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what we're telling people. Like, when you take the assessment and you read it, you're going to increase your score by 10%. And you could go back and take it any time. And it is just about it's being open to it and thinking about it and kind of putting the stuff out there.
One of the areas also came up when I did my assessment said I am a type A, left brain planner type, and that can make it very difficult to retire. And yet I balance that out with the level of work flexibility that I have. I was forced into a temporary retirement for about 6 months with the birth of our second child and some of the complications that he had. And I learned very quickly, oh man, like I don't have a schedule. And I ended up in a pretty bad mental place after a couple of months. And I learned what I need to do to put a schedule around myself because I need that. I'm a planner type. I'm left brain. I'm type A. Well, that means I need to have something I'm working on. I need to have a regimen. I need to be organized. I need to have a plan for the day. I need to be intentional every day. And if I don't have that, it can be very detrimental to my psychology. So now I do have a significant amount of flexibility. And I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about, how important it is to start building in some flexibility. You don't necessarily have to take a sabbatical. You don't have to take 6 months off, a year, but building in some flexibility and how that contributes to a better retirement for individuals like myself.
Well, and I think too, like the other thing is like, and this is what's cool about the assessment. So let's say that, you type A, left brain, planner type, and then let's even say that you had goals for your first 30 days of retirement. You knew who you're going to volunteer with. Like you had everything dialed in. And so it's perfect on that. There's no variances. But the problem is there's no margin for when things change or if something unexpected comes in, because I'm the same as you. And unexpected things, when they disrupt my day, they disrupt my mentality. And so it's it's about having that conversation, say, we need some margin in our life too, that it's okay if you don't accomplish these goals in 30 days. It's okay if you switch who you volunteer with, and talking through those things, because again, our personalities, affect other people and our families and other things. And so it isn't just about having it all dialed in, but understanding that as we get older, we need some margin as well. We need some flexibility. And, again, this whole idea of retire with it, like, if you're working out, because a lot of people will say, well, I don't have a workout routine, I'm going to start when I retire. Again, you're probably not. Like, there's no extra motivation. Like, you got to build those habits. And so if you can start practicing some just time where you're doing nothing, allow some flexibility, but start creating the life that this is what I say. If you want to live a successful life in retirement, start creating it now and living it out. Find that balance, find that flexibility, and build it in.
Yeah, you shared something around goals and having goals for the first 30 days of retirement. I think that's a very foreign concept to most people. I mean, what do I most often hear? And there's a gentleman I'll never forget. He said, what am I looking forward to in retirement? Like not having an alarm clock and getting up whenever I want and doing whatever I want every day. Yeah, he didn't have any goals for the first 30 days of the first 12 months of retirement. If you were talking to someone like that, how would you share with them the importance of having goals and what should goals look like in retirement? I think that's a struggle.
Yeah, I think part of the struggle is because everyone thinks of goals like, oh, you got to climb Mount Everest, or you got to hand out $100 on, every Friday on the street corner, or, you got to be doing something big and amazing. You don't. Goal number one should be creating a workout routine or following that routine, because one of the cool things about going to the gym at the same time is you start to get to know people, right? Mm-hmm. And so creating a routine around health and wellness, having specific times that you're going to reconnect with your work friends. That is the biggest gap, especially for guys. Because the other problem with work is that's our connector. And if we go too long without staying connected, you get out of the loop with, what's going on or frustrations or other things. And so you want to have a plan that within 2 to 3 weeks, you're reconnecting with, people that you work with, if you want to stay, in connection with them. And then I think too, like, what are, work? So retirement doesn't eliminate work, it reorients it. So you still have to work on other things. And one of those things is yourself. What about reading a book, going to a lecture, enrolling in some sort of a class, like doing something like that are really low barrier goals that just give you some focus and direction, but don't overwhelm you or kind of weight you down.
And you talk about going to a gym. So I go to the gym and then I need to tell somebody who I am. I'm introducing myself. And you imply that you do imply, and maybe I got the implication wrong, but I interpreted that it's kind of a negative thing. I shouldn't be introducing myself as retired. Why shouldn't I introduce myself as retired? What's wrong with that? I mean, I see so many introduce themselves as retired with a sense of pride and not negativity. Is this universal or?
Yeah, it's probably one of the hardest things that people deal with, and it kind of goes untalked about because, we're trained to think retirement is amazing, right? That we have finally reached this pinnacle of our lives, that we worked hard, we saved all this money. We worked so dang hard to save all this money. We don't have to work. Look at me now. Nobody cares. And that is the hardest thing because we've been programmed that retirement is amazing. And don't get me wrong, it's an amazing accomplishment. But people in the outside world, and this I've heard this hundreds of times, that when someone says or introduces themselves to retired, especially to younger people, the conversation just stops. There's still, unfortunately, a negative stigma to the idea of retirement that you're done, you're out to pasture, that you're just sitting around not doing much. Now that definition is changing, but that is the social stigma right now. And so we're very cautious in encouragement of people to say, you can say you're retired or you retired from this role, but you're doing something else. But to lay in there, something like, I'm focusing on my grandkids, or I'm doing this as a volunteer or other things, something other than just I'm retired, because a lot of people don't know how to take it. They just assume you're done and irrelevant. And we don't want that to happen to people.
So it's more about the way other individuals are interpreting that.
Exactly. And that's, so people say it proudly, like, I'm retired. Yeah, look at me. And the way other people, we unfortunately as a society, we value youth. We don't really value the wisdom and age. And so I think that's changing. But it's still this idea that other people are like, oh, well, good. And then the conversation stops and moves on. And we don't want that to happen to people. We don't want them to experience it.
So you started this quiz with 188 questions. You drilled it down to 56 questions. And I can imagine just how hard that probably was to get down to 56 and why you had to do it. You had to get it to a level where individuals were willing to put in the time and effort to do it. Yeah. But that had to be a painful process. I can only imagine you going, I really like this question. What were one of the questions that you go, I really wish this one would have made it? We had to exclude these 2 or 3.
Actually, originally we had financial questions. There was a whole area and not like, too deep, but we had a whole financial section, that we wanted to consider. And then, of course, the other problem is when you're beta testing this, everyone has something they want to add. Mm-hmm. And then it really, one of the tricks that we used in, kind of evaluating these questions is, of course, when we first started doing this, they were hand copies, right? So we were sending people PDF that they had to fill out. And what was really important and what was really valuable is almost every person who took it wrote something about a variety of the questions. They put a hand note. And that really helped us understand what questions were eliciting more feelings. And that's what we were looking to do, And again, the other thing is we were originally going to look at, a quote, academic, validated, assessment, but you got to have 3 questions that are validators, and you go down this path. I'm like, I don't want to take 120 or 180 question. And at the end of the day, the assessment is a starting point, so it's not like this is the end all be all, like, oh, Casey only scored a little bit over 1,000. Cool, man, he is in trouble. No, it's like, this is where you're at, and let's build on that. And so I can't remember all of the questions, but obviously there's a ton of them, but there's probably 15 financial questions that we pulled just because we wanted to pull it back to make it, to simplify it for the personal side.
Well, now you're antagonizing me. I mean, I want to know, my competitive side wants to know, did I win? So Bob, I'm curious, what did you score when you first took the quiz?
I scored under 1,000. I scored around 950. And we typically see people 850 to 950 in that range. And, my problem is my work. Obviously I had to, I knew the answers to, when you write something like that.
I know. You knew what was going to happen. So it's hard to take the quiz. I
kind of just took myself out of that mentality to say, okay, on face value, what do I do? How do I feel? And I think too, it's really the personal side too, on some of the scales, of really where am I spending my time and, what am I doing? So there's definitely some wiggle room for me, but very similar to you, like, I like my work. I like what I'm doing, but there's definitely some room for improvement.
Well, hopefully this is validating for individuals. We've got a couple of people that live and breathe this for decades, and we're still not getting, it's just hard to get over 1,000. And there's so much for us to work on. We all have something to work on. I think this is a really valuable quiz. So there's a lot of people that are going to want to take it, but let's get down to brass tacks. And how much does it cost? Where can we take it? What's the time commitment?
Yep. So the website is just retq.org. And it's $29. Like we said, if you want to have the first 10, 20 people, whatever, email you, that we're happy to have them go through it for free. We definitely want to give that freebie out to some people, but it's $29. Then you've got a couple options afterwards, so you can come to one of our group discussions. And those are fun. That's what the $29 includes. You can come to a group discussion. We usually get 5 to 10 people that, have taken the quiz, and I kind of walk people through the answers and the scores and how it kind of works. If people want to, talk to an actual coach, then we will refer them to a coach for a 30-minute consult. It's the same kind of thing. It's just individual. Some people want more of a private conversation. It takes there's 56 questions. It takes about 20 minutes. Once you take it, we will send you your report. And the report's about 16 or 17 pages. And so you need to really set about 30 minutes aside just to go through it. But we're kind of keeping things low key, but you have the group discussion as well as the coach option once you take it.
That's awesome. What an amazing value. So $29, I get to take the assessment, get my report, and join a group discussion. Very cool. And then we can, take it from there. But I know I learned a lot. I know others are going to learn a lot from this quiz. So we're going to be giving it away for free, as you just mentioned, to the first 20 individuals that write an honest rating and review of the podcast. Then shoot us an email with your iTunes username so we can validate it. info@howardbailey.com for the first 20 individuals that write an honest rating review for the podcast. Shoot us an email. Again, info@howardbailey.com. We'll set you up for that free assessment plus the group discussion, which is so cool. Thank you so much for offering that, Bob. Yeah. And it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show again.
Appreciate the opportunity, and really just, everything behind it is really how do we help people make better transitions and start to question everything about retirement. So thank you, Casey. I appreciate it.
Well, and I'm sure we're going to be having you on here again in about 5 or 10 years when you get that Nobel Prize for all the research here. So
I'll take it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bob.
All right. Thanks. Take care.